Okay, so after the motor's in place and that's all checked out, we have to replace this rod that we took out earlier. Gonna put it, it's the easiest to put some Loctite in the female threaded side of that. Just wiping off a bit of excess there, and you'll see here there's a little threaded stud that goes onto. So we're going to thread that back on as far as you can by hand. Then I just use a fine tooth pliers just to turn it the rest of the way. You can use any pliers really. Okay, you can see it seated all the way down, and then with the pliers I just make sure that it's, like I said, not a lot of force is required, but just make sure it's fully seated and it doesn't wobble. Okay, so now we're ready for the electrical connections. We want to bring over the bottom half of the camera that we had taken away before, and this is probably the trickiest part of the whole operation here. We want to make sure our O-rings are grooves are sealed, are clean, I'm sorry. And what I'll do is, I wiped this off previously. I'm just gonna squirt a little bead of grease all the way around, the same grease we used before. And then with my finger or a Q-tip, I just spread that, make sure that the whole surface is lubricated. This helps with any buildup of dirt or corrosion later after it's sealed. It makes removal of the disassembly of the camera easier in the future. Okay, so we have the front half and the back half, or the top and the bottom, depending on how you're looking at it. First off, we want to line the motors. You see that this is the motor for the tilt here. I'm sorry, for the pan. And you'll see we have a wire harness hanging out here with a bunch of connectors. But the first thing to do is to line up the two motors so you have your orientation correct. This pan motor goes below the tilt motor, the way it's sitting there. So we set that here like that. And you'll see that this rod goes all the way through and connects with this screw hole down here. So you'll see that you'll have them aligned, and then you'll know that you have the right orientation. It's not like this or like this. So holding on to the harness, we take the larger 2-pin connection, looks like this, and we connect it to the motor. And they have a friction lock, and they kind of just stick together like that. And then we move that up next to the motor like that. Now you can see we moved it together a little bit closer. We still have our remaining harnesses, and we're sliding it together. I'm going to stop here so you can see. Okay, so I have 4 connections left. I'm holding them here out of the way, but it's usually easiest to start with this big 10-pin connection and push that down onto the circuit board here. I put one finger under the circuit board and one on top of the connector and push the two together. You can see that it's parallel and fully seated, the same as these other two here. Okay, then I slide the camera together a little bit further. Holding the two smaller connectors out of the way, I connect the 8-pin connector first, second. Again, lining that up, my finger above the board, one below it, and squeeze. And then this 8-pin connection is connected. You can see it's parallel and fully seated. Okay, and then the last connection to the board is this white, brown, and black wire. Goes to this small 3-pin connection there. We'll slide together a little further. And we plug that one down. And then lastly is this 2-pin green and yellow one, the one we started with. We plug those two together like that. And that just lays in there on top of the others like that. Okay, so now the camera closure procedure. This is a little bit tricky, but just bear with me here. So you have this rod here is aligned with this hole down here. So you know your alignment is correct. There's not too much at this point. There's not too much you can be off by. But there's a last step that we have to engage a sensor down here at the last assembly step, and that's what we'll do next. So at this point, you want to move the outer camera housing off of this seal and onto this seal. So I'm going to grab it down this end. I'm going to wiggle a little bit and it comes right off. And then I'm going to slide it down a little bit here. And I'm going to push it on to the next seal. And be careful if you're working on a cloth like I am, you don't pinch the cloth in there or anything. Right? You want to keep the rotation the same. You don't want to rotate it at all. This groove lines up here like that, as far as positioning wise, to keep yourself oriented. So now you've exposed the back half of the camera. Here is this device here is the pan position sensor, and it's spring loaded. So this spring wire right here, I'm pushing down on it, needs to catch it's maybe easiest to do this vertically like this, on this metal rod here that's now protruding through. You can see that you can see metal rod here will line up with these two holes. So what you want to do is take a small screwdriver or a dental pick or your finger and pull this over onto that side of the rod. That engages the spring on the sensor, and then you can drop the whole back end straight down. And now it's just a matter of aligning those 4 rods with these 4 holes. So if you stand up and look down on these holes, you'll be able to see the 4 rods, and you can see which may or may not be aligned. What I do is I take the 2.5 millimeter driver and I just line it up in the hole and just make sure that the holes are all lined up. You can hear it snap into place as I line things up. Okay, so that's all lined up, and then this should snap down like that, and now you can see the camera's back together again. You might have a little bit of grease come out where you put extra grease on or what have you, but the camera is reassembled. Then lastly, take your 4, we're back to where we started. We can take our 4 rear assembly screws, again using the Loctite. And reinstalling those. We use the same procedure again. I tighten the screw till it's just snug and back off a little bit, and then do it on 3 more times. An alternative method is not to use Loctite at this point. If you're not sure about the repair or you want to check it out further, is you can leave the Loctite off, and just remember when you come back after you've tested everything, pressure tested it, electrically tested it, that you come back and you can remove the screws one by one and put Loctite on them and reinstall them. Again, snug and then back off a little bit. This allows you, by not tightening them, it just allows to see if there's any problems of parts fitting together or not going together right. without actually forcing something together, because if you crank down on it, you could be forcing something that may not be even. But I'm checking my gap all the way around here and here. It's all sealed tightly together, closely. And I'm going to go back around and just snug these up. Okay, so that's the replacement of that O-ring, of the tilt O-ring on this side. Right here, it's still marked. We want to keep it marked. Next, we do the sink test, we call it, or the bucket test. Pressurize the inside through the Schrader valve and see if the leak has been repaired. And then after that, we will attach it to a controller and make a full electrical test to make sure all the electric functions are still working, and make sure we haven't disturbed or disconnected or did any other disassembly of the camera that we may have not put back together. So that's it. The camera is back together.